The cold at Chosin Reservoir has its own vocabulary. The cold that you know, the cold of a January morning, a broken furnace, a late autumn storm, operates on the surface of things. It chills the skin, it stiffens the fingers. It is unpleasant, and you respond to it and you go inside. The cold at Chosin in late November 1950 was categorically different. It was a cold that had ceased to be a weather condition and had become an environmental fact, as unconditional and implacable as gravity. At minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit, with a sustained wind off the reservoir, the human body loses its capacity to distinguish between being cold and dying. The process is the same, only the speed differs, and at Chosin the speed was sufficient. Marines at Chosin found that morphine syrettes froze solid in their medical kits and had to be thawed under the tongue before they could be administered to screaming men. They found that the lubricant in M1 Garand rifles crystallized and locked the actions. They carried them broken down against their skin and reassembled them in the moments before contact. They found that water froze in canteens within minutes of exposure, that rations froze solid in their cans, that the rubber gaskets in vehicles shattered like glass. They found that a man who sat down to rest for what felt like a moment could be frozen to the ground by the time anyone came back for him. Frostbite progressed from discomfort to tissue death in under an hour of exposure. Dead men froze where they fell and had to be pried from the ground before they could be moved. This is the context for everything that follows. This is the environment in which Second Lieutenant Frank Harlow had to make decisions on the night of November 28, 1950, and in which those decisions had to be the right ones, because the wrong ones meant men died before they were ever found by the enemy. Harlow was 24 years old. He was from Pensacola, Florida. He had never seen snow before his ship docked at Incheon. He had grown up in weather that was a negotiation between heat and humidity, and the Korean winter was a revelation of a kind that transformed a man's understanding of what the physical world was capable of. He was responsible for 31 Marines when his platoon moved north to Udimni in late November. By the night of the 28th, he was responsible for 19. The other 12 had been killed or wounded in 3 days of fighting that his 1987 oral history describes in 17 minutes of steady, detailed narration before arriving at the night we're here to discuss. The column was moving south on the main supply route, the single road that ran from Udimni to Hagaruri to Kodari and eventually to the coast and the ships and the return to something that resembled the world. The Marines called the road the main supply route, and they called it various other names, none of them kind, because the road was not just a road, but the entire logic of survival in the Chosin pocket, the only axis of movement, the only direction that pointed away from encirclement, the only reason to keep moving when moving was extraordinarily difficult and stopping was a death sentence, but somehow still felt like relief. The whiteout came at approximately 2100 hours. The whiteout at Chosin was not like snowfall. It was a phenomenon specific to the reservoir environment. The combination of blowing ground snow and ice particles from the frozen reservoir surface, driven by a wind that came off the ice with a force and consistency that eliminated all visual reference. Not heavy snowfall, not a blizzard in the conventional sense, a horizontal white. Visibility reduced to approximately the length of your arm.
The man directly ahead of you was a shape, and then not even a shape, just a sound, the creak of his gear, the compression of his boots in the frozen ground. The man 2 positions ahead of you did not exist. Harlow's standing orders for whiteout conditions: halt, close up, maintain contact with the man ahead by holding his gear, and wait for the conditions to ease. He had executed this procedure 3 times in the preceding week. His men were practiced at it. They stopped, they closed the distance, they held on to each other in the white nothing, and they waited. The difference, on the night of the 28th, was that the whiteout did not ease. 1 hour. 2 hours. The temperature was falling. Harlow knew the arithmetic. 19 men, stationary, in a wind chill that he estimated at minus 40 equivalent, burning their remaining caloric reserves just to maintain core temperature. His medical corpsman, HM3 Esposito, moved up the column murmuring temperature assessments into Harlow's ear. 2 men developing early hypothermia symptoms. 3 men with frostbite progressing on the extremities. The arithmetic was clear. They could not stay where they were. Movement burned calories and risked separation, but stationary, they were dying by degrees that the thermometer could measure. He chose to move. He had a compass reading and a general southerly orientation, and he had the asphalt surface beneath his feet, the asphalt identifiable by the way it differed in sound and subtle texture from the frozen ground to either side. He ordered the column forward, single file, the rear man counting paces. He gave each man his position number and told them to call out every 50 paces so he could count the voices. He moved at the speed of the slowest man. It was Corporal Weir on point, 3 paces ahead of Harlow, who found the tracks. To the left of the road surface, running parallel to the road, moving in the same southerly direction, boot prints, clean impressions in the snow, edges not yet wind-worn, the definition of recent. Someone had made these tracks in the last hour, perhaps less. Single file, 1 set of prints, the spacing and depth of a man walking at a measured pace. Moving south, the same direction the column needed to go. Harlow moved up to look. He crouched in the howling white and aimed his flashlight, shielded with a cupped hand, the minimum necessary light, at the nearest impression. Boot sole. A large boot, military issue by the tread. Spacing regular, approximately 30 inches per stride, consistent with a man of average height walking at a deliberate, unhurried pace. The decision took him approximately 30 seconds. Standard doctrine for lost unit navigation in reduced visibility. If you find sign of friendly movement in the correct direction, follow it. There was no reason the person ahead of them was anything other than a point man from another unit, perhaps cut off as Harlow's platoon was cut off, finding his own way south on the same road. There was no reason to believe otherwise. He ordered the column to follow the tracks. Weir on point, flashlight on minimum, reading the impressions. They walked for the first hour. The tracks continued ahead of them, consistent, unhurried. The spacing never changed. Harlow timed the stride intervals. He had been doing this since his first week at Chosin. It was an involuntary habit by now, timing everything, measuring everything, because measurement was the only defense against the white chaos. And the spacing was constant to within half an inch for as far as they tracked. The man ahead of them was not adjusting to terrain variation. The ground here was not perfectly even. It rolled and dipped and rose in ways that required constant foot placement adjustment.
The tracks showed no such adjustment. Constant spacing, constant depth, constant stride. At the 40-minute mark, Sergeant DeLuca moved up from his position at the column's rear and fell into step beside Harlow without comment, which was what DeLuca did when he had something to say that he didn't want to say out loud. He walked beside Harlow for perhaps 50 paces. Then, quietly, so only Harlow could hear, "Sir, we can't hear him." Harlow said nothing. 19 men making movement through snow in this temperature, you hear that. You can hear us right now, the gear, the boots. The man ahead of us is making a track in 3 inches of compacted snow, 1 stride every 2 seconds. He is making no sound. Harlow said, "I hear you, Sergeant." DeLuca said nothing more. He dropped back to his position, and Harlow concentrated on the tracks. He told himself, wind masking sound. He told himself, some men are naturally quiet on their feet. He told himself, the cold affects sound propagation in unusual ways. This was a known phenomenon. He had read about it somewhere. He told himself these things and kept the column moving. Second hour. A heating pack for Corporal Mills, whose left hand was going. 2 men rotating the point to manage flashlight fatigue. The tracks continuing ahead of them, consistent as geometry. Third hour. HM3 Esposito lost the feeling in his right ear and was moved to the center of the column with a chemical hand warmer held against the side of his face. The tracks continued. The whiteout continued. The wind velocity had not changed since 2100 hours, which was itself unusual.
Winds at Chosin were variable, gusting and dropping and changing direction in the way of weather systems that interact with large bodies of frozen water. This wind was constant. This wind did not change. Harlow found himself, in the long third hour of walking, developing a specific and focused attention on the tracks. He had been watching them for 2 hours. He knew them. He could read every impression as Weir's light moved over it. He knew the exact pattern of the tread on the right sole, which was slightly more worn at the heel, and the exact depth of the left foot's impression, which was marginally deeper, suggesting the man was carrying a slight injury or asymmetry on the right side. He knew these tracks the way you know a face after long study, which was why, sometime in the middle of the third hour, he noticed that they had changed, very slightly, in a way that he couldn't immediately articulate. He moved up beside Weir without speaking, and crouched in the snow and held his own flashlight alongside Weir's and looked. The depth was greater, not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, but he had been looking at these impressions for 2 hours, and the depth had increased, not as if the ground had softened, not in a way consistent with the weight of a loaded marine. The impressions were deeper than they had been. He stood. He said nothing to Weir. He moved back to his position, and he kept the column moving, and he told himself the ground composition had changed. At 05:10 the wind stopped. As it had been constant, it stopped completely, not dying down, cut. And with the wind went the driving ice particles, and without the ice particles, the white void dissolved in real time, revealing the sky above them lightening toward pre-dawn gray, and the slope of the ridge to the west, and the frozen surface of the reservoir to the east, and the road running south ahead of them for perhaps 2 kilometers before it curved, and the snow in every direction, clean and pale and still, and the tracks. Harlow could see them clearly for the first time.
The full length of what was visible ahead, 2 kilometers of straight road, every impression visible in the flat gray light. He stopped the column. He walked forward, 10 paces to the nearest set of impressions, and he crouched down, and he held his flashlight over them, even though there was enough light now to see without it, and he looked. He looked at them for a long time. Then he stood up. Then he walked back to DeLuca, and he said, "We're turning the column north, right now. Move the men." DeLuca, reading his face, "Sir." "Move the men, Sergeant." In his 1987 testimony, Harlow was asked to describe what he saw in the tracks. He was quiet for a long moment. He said, "They were not boot prints. The shape was wrong. I can tell you the shape. The shape was larger than a man's foot, significantly larger. It was wider at the front than at the back, the opposite of a human foot. And there were pressure marks at the leading edge, at the wide part, that were consistent with points, with the termination of long digits. 4 of them, I counted, at the wide forward edge. The impression in the center was very deep, much deeper than the margins, the opposite of a human foot, which is deeper at the heel and at the ball." He paused. "And the depth, the overall depth. I told you the depth had been increasing through the night. In the clear light, I could see all of it, the full 2 kilometers. The tracks from the early part of the night, the first hour when we started following, were approximately the depth of a boot print from a loaded marine. By the time the wind stopped, the most recent impressions were 8 inches deep in compacted frozen snow." The board interviewer. 8 inches. 8 inches of compaction in frozen snow. Whatever made the last set of impressions weighed, I don't have the engineering background to calculate it, very much more than a man. He was asked, was there anything at the far end of the visible road, at the 2-kilometer point where it curved out of sight? A long pause. There was a shape, standing still, at the curve, facing back toward us. He was asked to describe it. He said, "Tall, upright, broad in the shoulders in a way that didn't make sense with the proportions. The proportions were wrong.
I looked at it for approximately 3 minutes in growing light, and the proportions did not resolve into anything I could identify as an animal or as a man. It was watching us. He was asked, what did he do? I turned my column north, and we moved back the way we had come. I looked back one time in the first 200 meters. I turned and I looked. It had moved. The shape at the end of the road had covered approximately half the distance between us, half a mile, in the time it took me to turn 19 men around and start them moving. Half a mile, without sound, in the time it takes to turn a column of men. And it was standing still again, still facing us, still watching us walk away. We walked north, and I did not run, and I did not look back, and I made Hagaru-ri by 0800, and I have not been back to Korea since, and I will not go back. The interviewer said, "Is there anything else?" The recording captures the sound of Harlow breathing. Then his voice, very quiet, not addressed to anyone in the room. I should have counted the tracks from the beginning, from that first hour. I kept thinking about it on the walk to Hagaru-ri, whether there had always been just the one set, whether whatever we were following had been alone the whole time. A long pause. Because I want to know if it always hunts alone. I want to know if there were others out there in the white we just couldn't see. I want to know that more than I have wanted to know almost anything in my life. And I am very glad I don't. The recording ends there. Frank Harlow died in Jacksonville, Florida, in March of 2004, at the age of 78. The oral history recording sat in the Marine Corps University archives, cataloged and available, for 17 years before it was cited in a 2004 retrospective on the Chosin Reservoir. The archivist who cataloged it in 1987 left a single note in the file jacket, in pencil, which reads, "Lieutenant Harlow, see especially final 13 minutes. Unusual account. Recommend review." The note is dated December 9, 1987. No review was ever conducted. The file sat on a shelf in Quantico, Virginia for 17 years. Whatever was in the snow at Chosin on the night of November 28, 1950, has never been identified. The tracks it left were covered by fresh snow by morning. There is no physical evidence that it was ever there. There is only the voice of a 24-year-old lieutenant recorded into a microphone 37 years after the fact, trying to find words for something he saw once in the dark and carried inside him, quietly, for the rest of his life. Sleep well.